guys, last week we talked about the nutrient cycles and we gave you a crash course on those, and this week we're talking about human impacts on those nutrient cycles. So for some consistency, I'm still going to talk about the water cycle, but we're going to talk about what humans do that affect the water cycle, usually for the worst. So, I'm going to just draw a picture. You guys aren't allowed to make fun. Not that there's anything to make fun of, because I'm the artist of the group. Just saying. We all know it's true. There's my tree. Look at that, how beautiful it is. Happy tree. Should I title it? Should I write like what's going on at the top? No?
Yes.
I don't know why you're laughing, but okay. Cool. Alright, so a couple things that humans do that affect the water cycle. The first one, I'm going to try to draw a little factory over here. My beautiful factory. Yes. The burning of fossil fuels affects the water cycle in multiple ways. So the first one is that it essentially heats up the atmosphere, which melts glaciers. This is going to be my glacier. It melts the glaciers, which sucks for multiple reasons. Like one, you're now putting a bunch of water where there was none into the system, but more than that, that was a surface that would have normally reflected the sunlight. Sunlight would have been reflected off, but because it's not there, because it's melting, you're essentially just kind of cooking the water a little more. You're heating up the system, which causes more water to evaporate. Remember, that was our one of our vocab words from last week. And when you have more water evaporating, you might feel like, well, what's the big deal? But you're essentially changing weather patterns. Seriously changing weather patterns.
I have them written down on my Google Doc.
Do you have everything on here?
I have a lot of changes in the weather patterns.
You gotta let me wing it and be awesome. So, okay, you know what? No, I'm gonna look at it. Ooh. Do you have it for the carbon cycle?
I just have effects of glacier depletion.
Oh, yes. It also causes ocean levels to rise, which I'm going to represent with this arrow here. Love that. Another side effect of burning fossil fuels, which again, human impact on the water system, is that you have these invisible gases, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide, that then interact with particles in the air, and then you end up with what we call acid rain that falls down, and then you have acidic precipitation, which sucks because it essentially depletes nutrients in the ground that plants could have used, and it's just not healthy all the way around. Alright, more stuff. Human impacts on the water cycle. We clear forests. So what happens is if you chop off trees, cut them down, you're essentially removing the transpiration that would have taken place in plants, kind of putting more water into the atmosphere. I'm missing a lot. Runoff. I love runoff. Okay, so runoff we talked about. It kind of defines itself. Surface runoff. And what happens is because humans have a lot of, let's call them agricultural pursuits, fields that we maintain with pesticides, that runoff will take the pesticides with it and pollute surface water and then percolate down. Remember, percolate kind of go through the ground and then pollute groundwater. Am I missing anything?
Ms. Verdugo, could you talk about wildfires and the water cycle?
That's something I have written down on the Google Doc.
Okay. You know, I hate how thorough you are. Let's see, where are you? Oh, cool. Okay, I found you. I found it. I hate you guys. Droughts. Let's see. Oh yes, so droughts that are man-made. Man-made droughts cause forests and other plant life to dry up and die, which then makes them more susceptible to fires. And that's yet another impact of ours on the water cycle. I'm lost now. My brain just died. I didn't like having to look on the screen. Alright, someone else? Yes?
All right, next up we're going to talk about the greenhouse gases and the greenhouse effect. Like we talked about last week, two huge gases that contribute to the greenhouse effect are CO2 and methane. Methane can be largely produced by cattle. When they're chewing their cud, they release methane by burping. So methane gets in the atmosphere, CO2 gets in the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels, as well as us breathing. We breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon dioxide. And if we continue on with what Ms. Verdugo was talking about with man-made water cycle, hurting the water cycle, by cutting down trees, we are getting rid of the ways that we can eliminate the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So the CO2 and the methane go into the atmosphere and create this thick layer. What that thick layer does is that it traps all the heat that's coming from the sun. So the heat can always come in and it bounces off of the water, glaciers, the earth, bounces up, but the thick layer of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases traps the heat in, just keeps it bouncing back and forth inside of the atmosphere. That contributes to what most people call global warming, but global warming and climate change are completely different things. In the Arctic, it does take the form of warming and it melts the glaciers, but in other places, that melting of the glacier causes changes in precipitation patterns, where we've seen in California they've gotten less precipitation, and states in the eastern side of the country have gotten a lot more. This causes the trees in the western side of the country to die, dry out, and result in more forest fires, which continuously and further dries the forests out, causing more forest fires. So greenhouse gases are really bad for the atmosphere, and we just keep creating more and more by using fossil fuels, such as oil and gasoline. Those are the main sources of fossil fuels that we use to burn. There are ways around this, around using oil, gasoline, and using renewable sources. But those renewable sources also have their problems, such as when you dam up a river, the water on one side of the dam starts to run out after a while, and then you have no more water to power the hydroelectric dams. It also stops the water from flowing past the dam and causes estuaries to dry up. An estuary is where a river meets the ocean. Right there. That would be an estuary, and it's causing these, building dams causes these estuaries to dry up, reducing plant life in those areas and animal life in those areas. Am I missing anything?
I have a question.
Yeah.
On your drawing of the Earth, what continent is that?
One of them.
Okay. I'm done.
All right. Who do we go down the list here? Mia, glad you could make it. Candace, Jasmine, good to see you in class today. Let's see, Jackson, yeah, I get pretty excited about the man-made consequences of dead zones and the nitrogen cycle myself. That, keeps me up at night sometimes too. Who else? Shout out to, Ashley, how's your day going? Good? Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. But anyway, I'm here for the last installment of this. Well, yeah, I mean, the phosphorus cycle's kind of like the neglected stepchild. Yeah, we're not going to talk about the phosphorus cycle. Sorry, phosphorus cycle. We're going to talk about some of the major consequences of the nitrogen cycle for my segment today. The biggest problem with nitrogen is we're using too much of it. Reminder, plants cannot use gaseous nitrogen, and we talked about that in the last lecture, so I won't run into that. But so humans, this was actually back in like the 1910s. Humans were kind of concerned with like the same concerns that we have right now, where like we're going to run out of resources and everybody's going to run out of food and die because we were running out of nitrogen in the soil. And the crazy thing is, people actually had to go and like mine bat poop because that was like a very concentrated source of nitrogen back in the day, and we were running out of good supplies of bat poop. A scientist named Fritz Haber learned how to take nitrogen from the air and industrially fix it in a process, which is not surprisingly called the Haber. Uh-oh, are you okay, Ms. Verdugo?
Everything is fine.
The Haber-Bosch process. And if you want to learn more about that, because he's a little more interesting than just the scientists that learned how to fix nitrogen, there's going to be a bonus link for that. So we've been able to take nitrogen out of the air, make chemical fertilizer. That's a good thing for the most part, because that basically has allowed more humans to survive on planet Earth, like basically exponentially increase the human population, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to grow enough food to support ourselves. All right, so anyway, but there is a downside to this. Overusing nitrogen is creating something called dead zones, which that sounds pretty awesome, but... Alright, dead zones are areas of the ocean where you basically have this giant swath, we're talking like thousands of miles in the ocean, where you just cannot sustain life. So, in the United States, the biggest dead zone is right around the Gulf of Mexico. Alright, Ms. Verdugo, do you care to criticize my drawing of the United States here?
Is that supposed to be Florida?
Yes, it is Florida.
That looks very unfortunately shaped.
There, okay.
Oh my god.
So anyway, in our United States...
Free. Is that Texas?
Alright, so we have... So right around Mississippi, we have the Mississippi River, not shockingly, which is a river that is basically a whole bunch of smaller rivers branch and drain into the Mississippi River. And a river delta is a place where a river drains into the ocean. And not really surprisingly at all, river deltas are like among the most fertile places in countries in order to grow crops. So we have the Mississippi River Delta and the whole like greater Mississippi River Basin right through here. And this is where most of our agriculture goes on. So what happens is, in order to grow crops, we need fertilizer, so a lot of nitrogen gets added to this area. It's like... it's a type of ammonia species, so we get a lot of fertilizer around here. And like I said, that's important because that allows us to get enough food. But the bad thing is we usually use more fertilizer than what is necessary. So anytime that it rains, that fertilizer is going to run off with the rain, and it's going to end up in the lowest possible point, and that would be a stream. Okay, and those streams all feed into rivers, and then those rivers feed into bigger rivers, and finally they end up getting dumped out into the ocean. So you get this big old blob of water with very nutrient-rich things. So, like, for example, nitrogen and phosphorus, because those are the main components of fertilizer. And that's detrimental, because what happens is if you have a whole bunch of fertilizer within a body of water, you're going to end up with this giant algae bloom. Now, this is counterintuitive, but these algae blooms, what they do is they actually remove all the oxygen out of the water. Yeah, I know, Danira, you might be asking me, Mr. Lear, algae's a plant. Why wouldn't it be adding oxygen to the water? Well, it doesn't work that way, because this algae, you get this explosive growth of algae. So all of a sudden, you have all this algae grows, but then it dies off immediately. So I'm going to change this to brown instead of green. So we have this dead, stinking, festering, decaying mass of dead algae here.
Do you help
And
spelling algae?
what we get is, no, I'm good, I got it.
Okay.
So this dead algae, so when it's dying, it kind of sinks and is getting decomposed. Decomposition, that's not a vocab word we've gotten yet. That's just basically the breaking down of dead things. And the main organism that breaks down dead things is bacteria. So the reason why this algae causes a loss in oxygen is bacteria, it's like us. It breathes in oxygen and breathes out CO2. So as that dead algae sinks down to the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, the bacteria is also consuming the oxygen from the water as it digests that dead algae. And what you get is this giant area of the ocean with virtually no oxygen. And if you want to use a sciencey term for it, we get this hypoxic area, which means no oxygen. And what that, basically any kind of organism that requires oxygen, and yes, fish do need air, they don't just breathe water, they extract oxygen from the water. So what happens is you get this big area where just nothing can really live, essentially. And the Gulf of Mexico is one of the most important fisheries in the United States as far as shrimp and a whole bunch of other types of sea life that are valuable for a food source and other things. So these dead zones, they happen pretty much everywhere around the globe at any major river delta. And it's from overuse of nutrients. So one thing humans need to work on is being able to be more precise about our delivery of fertilizer to different places so that you don't get massive amounts of runoff. We still need to grow enough crops to, survive, but we also need to be more careful with our application of fertilizer so that we don't have these runoff situations and dead zones and hypoxia. So anyway, that's pretty much the summary of like how the nitrogen cycle can be a problem, is overuse of nitrogen. It's kind of nitrogen, other fertilizers, a big culprit in forming these ocean dead zones. So anyway, I feel like that pretty much concludes our lecture for today. Do Mr. Radovich, Ms. Verdugo, do you two have anything else you'd care to add other than my drawing skills?
I think that we're set.
We're good? Okay.